Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we have this verse here. I'll just read the translation and do some more invocations as well. And then we'll go into a little sharing, a little discussion, and we'll leave some time for questions or for comments at the end as well. Okay, so we're reading from this section here, the chapter 58 entitled Krishna Marries the Five Princesses. And we are reading this section where Krishna and Arjuna go into the forest. Translation for verses 13 and 14. Once Arjuna, the slayer of powerful enemies, donned his armor, mounted his chariot flying the flag of Hanuman, took up his bow and his two inexhaustible quivers, and went to support with Lord Krishna in a large forest filled with fierce animals. Purport: this incident must have taken place after the burning of the Khandava forest, since Arjuna was now using the Gandiva bow and other weapons he had acquired during that incident. Verse 15. With his arrows, Arjuna shot tigers, boars, and buffalo in that forest, along with rurus, sarbas, gavias, rhinoceros, black deer, rabbits, and porcupines. And verse 16. A crew of servants carried to King Yudhishthir the slain animals fit to be offered in sacrifice on some special occasion. Then, feeling thirsty and tired, Arjuna went to the bank of the Yamuna. Purport: as Srila Prabhupada would often explain, the Kshatriyas or warriors would hunt in the forest for several purposes: to practice their fighting skills, to control the population of ferocious beasts who are a threat to human beings, and to provide animals for Vedic sacrifices. The killed animals would be given new bodies by the power of the sacrifices. Since priests no longer have that power, the sacrifices would now constitute mere killing and are thus forbidden. In the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find that the great sage Narada severely chastised King Prachini Barishat for abusing this principle of authorized hunting. In fact, the king had become like a modern sportsman who cruelly killed animals as a so-called hobby. I'll read that last paragraph one more time. In the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we find the great sage Narada severely chastised King Prachini Barishat for abusing this principle of authorized hunting. In fact, the king had become like modern sportsmen who cruelly kill animals as a so-called hobby. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. It's wonderful to be with everyone here at the Bhakti Center, at the feet of Shri Radha Muralidhar, Shri Gaurachandra, Nrsingadev, all the devotees, Srila Prabhupada. It's always great to be with all of you in your company, in your Sangha, in this Sangha, and focusing in on the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I will share a couple thoughts from this section, these three verses 13 to 16. So we can see here, kind of just setting some context for this section. We have Krishna is staying with the Pandavas in this section, And right before this, we had Krishna arrive, and the Pandavas all stood up to welcome Krishna because they had so much respect and love genuinely in their heart for the Lord. Not just as the Lord, but as their relative, as their friend, as their really their everything. And then we had Queen Kunti, Mother Kunti, who shared some prayers toward Krishna and in praise of him. And this section of this chapter is being described how Arjuna and Krishna go into the forest together. And what's interesting, I also wanted to pick up on this point is that if we look at, and I'm just pulling up my notes here, but if we look at chapter 48, we're on chapter 58, and we look at chapter 48, a couple of months ago, we were on that section. And in that chapter, Krishna sends Akrura to Hastinapur, which is the capital of the Kuru kingdom, to kind of get a sense, give a report, if you will, of how the Kauravas were treating the Pandavas, how King Dhritarashtra and his evil sons, Duryodhana, Dushasana, and his all his children were treating the Pandavas. And Akrura comes back, and the report is not so favorable, right? He's mentioning that the Pandavas are shining with all sorts of good qualities. This is, I think, chapter 49, 50, around that section. And he's saying they're shining with so many good qualities, but the Kauravas are very envious of them. They're envious of their humility. They're envious of their strength, their piety, their intelligence, all those wonderful qualities that they have, godly qualities. And we can see between that section and now, there's been a change. So the Pandavas are no longer living in Hastinapur at this point. And what ended up happening in the Mahabharata story, which is kind of being chronicled also in the section a little bit, in these sections, is that uh, uh, Dhritarashtra, he ended up giving the kingdom or half the kingdom to kind of avoid there was a growing as the Pandavas were growing older in under the care of Dhritarashtra after their father passed away. He was kind of getting concerned that there were some power struggles between his sons and the sons of Pandu, the Pandavas. And so he actually divided the kingdom in half, if you will. And it was sort of quite a bad bargain where he said, to the Pandavas, you take half the kingdom, but we'll be giving you this very unrefined land known as Kandaprastha. And meanwhile, the Kauravas could keep Hastinapur in their side of the kingdom. That was already built out. There were many settlements, many cities. All of that was there. But meanwhile, Kandaprastha was this forest and really desert. It was not barren land, but it was really untouched land. There's no even settlements or towns or anything that was there. So really, they were kind of giving them, it was kind of like a backhanded gift, right? So like someone gives you a backhanded compliment where, they're sharing something, it seems like positive, but there's actually a negative in that, right? So similarly, in this gift that the Pandavas were given, it was a gift by the king in order to kind of appease them, but it was also not such a great deal, right? Basically. And but Krishna is always there. So even in this, when the Pandavas were given Kandava Krishna was there to help them make it a place that they could stay and they could thrive, right? Because again, it was jungle and desert. It was very untouched, unrefined land. It wasn't in any way wasn't inhabitable. And so they took this land, and Krishna and Arjuna actually invoked a great fire, Agni, and there's a story that comes with that. And they actually ended up burning down part of this forest, Kandaprastha, to be able to create a city that was known as Indraprastha, which became the kingdom, the capital for their kingdom, the Pandavas' kingdom, for some time before the Mahabharata war. So so just to give you some context, not to get too technical, but this section of the Bhagavatam, or this story, is in between. It's explained. Jiva Goswami explains. It's explained in one of the purports, and later in this chapter, that Jiva Goswami explains the sequence of events in this chapter are not exactly as they're said here, but they're actually a little bit different. But you have Pandavas coming to Kantavaprastha, the forest being burned down by Krishna and Arjuna, and then uh, there is this pastime that we're going through here, and then the city being built of Indraprastha. That's the kind of the sequence of events. Now, one of the things that I wanted to, there's many points that were mentioned here, but I wanted to focus in on this point here. So it's mentioned that Krishna and Arjuna, they're going into the forest, and with his arrows, Arjuna shot tigers, boars, buffalo, different species of deer and antelope, rabbits, and porcupine. And then also it's mentioned that a crew of servants carried King Yudhishthira and the slain animals fit to be offered to King Yudhishthira, the slain animals fit to be offered in sacrifice on some special occasion. And in that purport, it's explained the code, right? The code of dealing with violence in this world, right? And some might read this section and this purport and say, okay, so does this mean that, this justifies, killing animals and eating meat, right? And being violent toward other living beings. But it's explained, and I wanted to cover that a little bit today. And these are probably not new thoughts for everyone, but I thought to maybe just meditate on this point in a few different ways for our own realizations and discussion. So I just want to pull up this purport again here. Okay, so as Srila Prabhupada often explained, the Kshatriyas or warriors would hunt in the forest for several purposes: to practice their fighting skills, to control the population of ferocious beasts who were a threat to human beings, and to provide animals for Vedic sacrifices. The killed animals will be given new bodies by the power of the sacrifices. Since priests no longer have that power, the sacrifices will now constitute mere killing and are thus forbidden. In the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find the great sage Narada severely chastised King Rachini Barishat for abusing this principle of authorized hunting. In fact, the king had become like modern sportsmen, poorly kill animals as a so-called hobby. So this is the issue today, right? We see this, how many animals are killed every year just in this country alone, in the United States, which is one of the actually biggest culprits in killing animals, slaughtering animals, and then around the world, right? We can see that there's the stats are actually pretty staggering as well. Even just for, I was reading that even just for the emissions for greenhouse gases, when we consider the environment, ecology of this planet, and climate change and other things, they're saying that at least 14 to 15% of the emissions of greenhouse gases comes from the livestock industry, where they're slaughtering animals. So you can see it's actually a big issue. Now, is this verse, would say, oh, Arjuna is killing animals and Krishna's there. So is this justification for this behavior to do this? Is it okay? No, it's not. We can see here that there are some very specific um, conditions that are being met, right? Um, who is they? So it could be anyone, right? Someone who's arguing that, oh, this might be the right thing to do, right? Someone that's coming in and trying to debate potentially. But a couple points that are made, and I wanted to share one framework from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur around the four motivations. So in Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that there's four principal motivations for behavior in this world. And they are fear, desire, duty, and love. Fear, desire, duty, and love. And we can see here that the Kshatriyas, in this case, when you talk about Arjuna, they're acting from a place of duty. And so we have these four steps. And we have fear and desire being more limiting, puts us in bondage. And duty and love are more liberating. They're higher motivations to act from. So these are just some four motivations. This is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So it's explained here that in this section that Kshatriyas, they act from a place of duty, from a place of duty. And there's three reasons that are given, as we talked about. One is to practice their fighting skills, right? That's there for a sense of building their survival skills. So being able to fight, and ward off attacks from other armies, enemies, and threats. The second is to control the population of ferocious beasts who are a threat to human beings. So there's a defense, right? Self-defense, so survival, self-defense. And then there's a spiritual reason that's given to provide animals for Vedic sacrifices, where there was a time, and this no longer applies today, it's mentioned in the purport, there was a spiritual reason where that these animals would be given new bodies, would move through the 8.4 million species of life when it's done properly, with the right mood and the sacrifice has been done. But there's no one that can really do this nowadays, really, even. So we have three reasons. And when we look at Kshatriyas, they come from this place of duty, whereas you have these modern sportsmen, or this example is given of the king in the fourth canto, Prachini Barishat, where it becomes from a place of desire, right? When we look at how people want to, attack other animals or to hurt other people, it actually comes from this place of wanting to desire to enjoy their flesh, right? To enjoy even the sport of hunting, very much is popular in many parts of the world, right? And it's quite ghastly in that way, but it's really to enjoy their meat and enjoy killing the animal and even relish that ability to take life from someone. And so it's coming from that place of desire versus coming from a place of duty, where Kshatriyas are doing something that's not really glamorous, but they need to do it for a variety of reasons, as mentioned. And in this principle is also getting me to think this principle of ahimsa that we want to follow. It's a principle of Dharma, one of the legs of Dharma, and the principles of karma that are important in our devotional life to some extent. They're especially ahimsa is very important. And it means that the principle of ahimsa means the principle of least damage. We try to do as less damage as we can in our interactions in this world. I was thinking that unfortunately, when we're part of this world, as it's mentioned, in many places, that this world is not really fit for a gentleman and for a gentle lady, right? Because unfortunately, in this world, violence is a part of this world. It's unfortunately a part of it. Even in a vegetarian diet, we have to unfortunately, eat plants, right, and take life in that way. Now it's different in the sense that obviously there's different pain that's dealt with when it comes to, I mean, even plants feel pain. We think about animals who are a little bit more evolved in the species of life, have a little bit more when it comes to that. But that's why we offer our food as well, from the principle of ahimsa, because unfortunately in this world we have to have some level of violence to actually participate in the world, whether it's for our own survival and our food, our defense, and we have that spiritual side, which is not really relevant these days. And so that's why we have to. That's why also we offer our food to Krishna and to the deities to also, in some ways offer to Krishna and also atone for the violence that we have to commit to kind of survive in this world. But as devotees, we should always be thinking about what's the least amount of violence that we can commit? What's the least amount of damage that we can commit? And avoid it altogether, if at all possible. And this also goes for, I was thinking that this is there for the physical side, but it's also there from our words, right? In the Gita, it's mentioned that we should practice the austerity of speech. This is something that's really important, where what we're speaking, is it pleasing, right? Is it beneficial? Is it truthful? Is it not agitating to others? And this is mentioned as some of the characteristics of our speech. And there's actually a lot of research done around communication. So even, for example, nonviolent communication. That's a big area of research around communication. How can we be less violent when we're communicating with others? Not just within our community, but with everyone, our family, our friends, because we don't want to hurt others with our words. Right? So there's physically harming other creatures, other species, other humans, other devotees, and then there's also that with uh, our words as well. So I wanted to make some of those points when it comes to the principles of ahimsa and causing the least amount of disturbance in this world. Unfortunately, violence is part of this world for one reason or another, because there's always a battle to survive in many cases, unfortunately. But as devotees, we want to minimize that. And we can see here the Kshatriyas, they're not coming from a place of enjoyment per se, but as mentioned, the three reasons given are to practice their fighting skills, survival, to control the population of ferocious beasts, and to provide animals for Vedic sacrifices. So we do that. And then also we have to deal with the effects also of our actions, which is the second part. So we have ahimsa and we have karma. I wanted to just share a few stories around the principle of karma that we're all familiar with, but can be a reinforcement for all of us, to help us think also about our behavior and actions, because we reap what we sow. Even if our intention is sometimes right, or our heart is in the right place, the principles are still there. Even with this, what's interesting is this story of the Khandava forest. I was reading that the forest, when it was burned by Arjuna and Krishna, that there were some animals that escaped from the forest. But there's some that could not escape, unfortunately, in the forest fire. And one of them was Taksha, who was this Naga, was a snake bird. His relatives were actually killed in the burning of the forest fire. And that actually created within him a deep enmity toward the Pandavas, toward Arjuna. And actually, at the end of Srimad Bhagavatam, he comes and he actually kills, as predicted, he actually kills King Parikshit, the grandson of Arjuna. And so we can see this principle of karma coming around, that he has this principle of this enmity toward the Pandavas, that he carries, for so many years, and then, comes back at the end of Srimad Bhagavatam as, as Parikshit was cursed to die in 7 days, and comes and fulfills that curse. And so we can see that principle of karma. Also, another example is given of Dashrath Maharaj, King Dashrath from the Ramayana, who, previously, in his life, so as we all know, he had to lose his beloved son, Lord Ram, and had to exile him from the kingdom. Very painful, which ultimately resulted in him dealing with that grief. He actually passed away, with so much grief that he was dealing with from having to exile his own beloved son, who he wanted to make king. Obviously, that's a longer story. But previously earlier in his life, he was an expert hunter, and he would kind of know how to hear. He would know how to hear where different animals were just based off their sound, right? Just based off the sound. And so one day he was hunting, and he mistook a human to be a deer. based off his sound, what he was hearing. And he thought that he was hearing a deer drinking some water from the river, but it was actually a human boy. It's a boy who was there who was actually getting water for his parents. Um, and so he actually shot him with an arrow by mistake. And then when he heard that it was a human cry, he went to help and took the arrow out. And the son mentioned the boy mentioned that my parents are very thirsty. I went to give them water, to bring them water. Please bring them this water. Unfortunately, he passed away from that injury. But King Dashrath brought the water to the parents of this boy, and he told them about their son's death. And the grief-stricken parents, they cursed Prince Dashrath, and they said, just as we're suffering and dying due to separation from our beloved son, you too shall have the same fate. You'll feel the same feelings that we're feeling. That we're feeling this grief. Unfortunately, you will also feel this grief as well. And then also, and this story is not this last story, and I'll end here. This story is not in the Mahabharata specifically, but it's also part of kind of the greater folklore around the Mahabharata that's there. Some of the tales that have come from there. But King Dhritarashtra, he asks Krishna after the war that I had 100 sons and all of them were killed. Why is that? Um, and it was mentioned that 50 lifetimes ago, King Dhritarashtra, he was a hunter, and while he was hunting, he tried to kill a nest of birds, and the father of the birds, flew away. Basically, he wasn't able to kill the father, but in his anger, he actually ruthlessly slaughtered 100 of the baby birds in the nest, right? 100 of them. And the father had to watch in agony because he had flown away at his children being killed. And the doctor said, okay, but then why did I have to wait 50 lifetimes to, feel this pain? And the answer was given that it took you 50 lifetimes to accrue the requisite punya to have 100 children, to have 100 sons to begin with. And then once you were able to get that, accrue the pious credits for that, to have 100 children, then you got the reaction, the papa, the sin, for what you had done 50 lifetimes ago. So even also in the Gita, in the fourth chapter, it's mentioned, Krishna mentions 417 that the intricacies of action are very hard to understand, very complex. So we should know what is proper behavior, what proper action is, what's forbidden action, what inaction is, all of that, because we have the four motivations. If we're acting from a lower place, that's causing more bondage. If we're acting from a higher place, it's causing more, ultimately, it's liberating us. And so I wanted to end there and share a couple points. I promised I would leave it open for some comments and thoughts. It's a very interesting section here, but I wanted to kind of take a little different angle on these verses. We have, again, Krishna and Arjuna going into the forest. And we kind of set the context as a recap. Krishna is with the Pandavas. They have the Khandava forest, and they are making it their kingdom in the Prastha. And in this section, eventually, Krishna will marry Kalindi. But this section is just starting. And in this section, we talked about the verses talking about Arjuna, killing certain animals and them being offered for sacrifice, and what the practice was at that time. Is this justifying, for people who feel that it's just justifying violence toward animals, or who believe that's okay? No, it's not. And we look at that through the lens of the four motivations. Kshatriyas act from a place of duty, which is not always glamorous, but it's necessary. And the reasons are given there. And then we talked about the principles of Ahimsa, not just physically, but also in our communication, emotionally as well, which are very important. And then we ended off with some stories around the principles of karma, which are a big factor in us making sure that we also are as nonviolent as possible, because we end up reaping what we sow. We talked about some of the examples of Taksha, which is the snake who ends up killing King Parikshit based off his enmity toward the Pandavas. We talked about the story of King Dashrath, and then we talked also about King Dhritarashtra as well. So I want to end there. Thank you all for your time and attention, and we'll open it up for any comments, for any questions.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. There are some questions in the chat, and Bhima Prabhu has his hand up. Would you like to take care of the chat first, or Bhima?
I can look at the chat. It seems like this is quite active. It's like wonderful. A question: was Arjuna avoiding violence on the battlefield? Okay, great question. And I see here, Henry, he was trying to, but Krishna informed duty was more important. Yes, so Arjuna was avoiding violence, but as mentioned, sometimes violence is justified or needed. In the Mahabharata, it was the last resort after a series of. It wasn't that the Pandavas went immediately toward the war, right? We can see. I have the Mahabharata book behind me in my bookshelf. Um, we can see that over so many years, so many efforts were made to peacefully settle the conflict between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Unfortunately, there was also, in some ways, it was important. Like in some ways, the Mahabharata war was going to happen no matter what, right? When we look at the story and we look at some of the sages even who saw forward and saw the great battle coming. But it's not that violence or no violence. It's that we don't ideally we don't want to be violent in this world, but violence is part of this world. We want to avoid it as much as we can. That's the principle. Now that's an art. It's not necessarily an exact science. And for that, Arjuna had Krishna to guide him on how he should act and behave. Sometimes we can kind of make up our own criteria of what we think where things are justified, right? And that's not good. And so we have to really be tuned in and start with at least sattva guna, because when we're in rajas and tamas, it's harder to differentiate what's needed when, right? And but when we're more in sattva guna, at least in that mode of goodness, starting at that point, then we can see clearly a little bit more in the mirror of what's needed, what's not needed. And so the Mahabharata was necessary. Krishna, yes, he did encourage Arjuna that this is your duty as a Kshatriya. It's not a glamorous task, once again, but your duty to protect against the evil that the Kauravas were. The Kauravas tried to kill them many, many times, and we're not even giving them the land that could be pierced through the thread of a needle, the tip of a needle. And so there was some serious conflict there. So, okay. And let's look here. Okay, is violence, Jeffrey's asking, is violence, does that answer the question, by the way, for Arjuna avoiding violence on the battlefield?
Yeah.
Center?
Yes,
Okay, wonderful.
thank you.
Jeffrey, is violence a subjective descriptor of the viewer's assessment of the appropriateness of an action? Each weapon wielded in the battle of Kurukshetra was appropriately positioned in its dharmic constitution, and millions were liberated in 18 days. There was no violence, but only absolute truth on the field of dharma. Yes. So to the point earlier, that's a great point. You can look at it in different ways, and this is kind of getting more complex. But even we look at when Krishna kills the demons in his pastimes, he's actually liberating the demons, right? So when you think about it, it's actually a liberation. Whether it's Kamsa, all the demons in Vrindavan, Shishupal, even these demons were so envious, have so much hate toward Krishna. It's actually for their benefit. So there are different ways to look at things. There's a spiritual plane to look at it, and it's a very different vision than what sees on a material plane as well. That's when it comes to Krishna and Krishna's plan. So sometimes things that look quite bad can actually be very powerful spiritually for us, right? Even in our own lives, we can see that. So spiritually, things can the angle is much different. So was there no violence? There's only absolute truth on that field of Dharma. Yes, that's definitely a view of it, a spiritual view of it. Absolutely. And is violence a subjective description of the viewer's assessment of the appropriateness of the action? That's where having guru, sadhu, shastra, having having a grounding in sattva guna is important because again, we can kind of also misconstrue behavior and even, a need for violence. If that's all we've known, we might resort to that when we don't need to resort to that, right? So we have to consciously build that because then we can actually see what's necessary in the moment. Often it's not really needed, frankly speaking, but there are times where it is needed. And that's we have to be ready to do that if it's there, especially as Kshatriyas.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. That's a very good point that you made about Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Is to make reference.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And then Kartik Prabhu is saying, wonderful to see, by the way, Kartik Prabhu. How does pest control fit in with Krishna consciousness? Spring is here, and I try to carefully throw out the critters that walk in without pesticides, but without pesticides, my home gets overrun. Prabhu says, I have the same thing at my house. I'll open it up for anyone to share. I don't pretend to be the most realized devotee on here, so I struggle with the same things that everyone's talking about here. From my vantage point, I would say that what I've understood, again, we try to be as least violent we can, right? So you can try to, as you mentioned, you carefully throw out any critters that are there in the home. Even in our home, we have sometimes some spiders or some bugs that find their way in somehow or another. Some very interesting bugs. We actually live next to a big forest and reservation, so we'll have different creatures coming in sometimes, bugs and whatnot, insects. We try our best to deal with them in a diligent way, and sometimes it's unavoidable. And that's the point that sometimes violence is part of this world, but we shouldn't. There's engaging in violence and there's becoming violent, and there's two different things, right? So we don't want to become that. Sometimes we have to, kind of like a tool. We pick up a tool. We need to, do an action. But it's not like that tool becomes us, right? We create a separation. So sometimes we do have to put some pesticide or some defense or something like that. And unfortunately, like even sometimes there's some, even in this area that I'm living in, there's some certain bugs that come around seasonally that are quite bad for the environment. And what's the mandate by the government is that actually you should kill them, these bugs on site, because they're quite bad for the environment. They end up eating the leaves and they end up hurting the ecosystem and whatnot. Now, it's really hard for me to do that, to actually kill them because I don't feel that's appropriate, but that's the guidance that's given, by the authorities. So I think that's hard to, again, this is part of living in this world. We kind of have to deal with the reality and then our ideals and figure out how we can have those coexist as best as possible. But it's not going to always be perfect. It's not always going to be a perfect application. But again, we have to refine the art of figuring out how to apply it, right? Time, place, and circumstance. And then we can kind of also ask for forgiveness. And in our heart know that we're very fallible, that we're very prone to imperfect behavior, and ask for forgiveness from Krishna. That whatever I'm doing wrong, please correct that one way or another. So that's also needs to be there, that mood. So that's my take on it. Anyone else want to share? I'm open to hearing.
Temple room.
Hare Krishna. You can hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
We made a very good point that Arjuna was very fortunate that he had Krishna to help him discriminate what was appropriate. When we talk about karma, we talk about ahimsa, but ultimately, Shastra says, what is the use of severe austerity, control of the mind, control of the senses, without devotional service to Krishna? We have a very simple life. Krishna is so wonderful that he's there. Krishna is so wonderful that he's there, available. If we approach him and say, Lord, we're here on your behalf. We'll do as you like. And then with no qualms, we're ready to tolerate or to perform execution. And it's not violence. If it's done under the direction of the Lord, for the pleasure of the Lord, with the intention, nothing selfish, nothing exploitive, but simply devotional service to Krishna. So you made that really good point that Arjuna is fortunate that Krishna is there to guide him. And we are also, by Krishna's arrangement, fortunate enough to have access to say, Lord, what do you want? Right?
Srila
And then-
Prabhupada would instruct his disciples to give insects prashanam. Srila Prabhupada would release the insects and he would say, I give you the whole world. It's very instructive.
There are many things that Prabhupada did. There was one incident, Kalaji was saying, can you hear me?
Yeah.
He was inside the mosquito net and giving Prabhupada massage. And there were mosquito there. And Kalaji went to
To give
execute
him
them.
prashanam.
If you let me talk, you'll hear.
I'm
Otherwise, you
sorry.
can just... And Kalaji went to deal with this insect. And Prabhupada said, no, leave him alone. But then the insect landed on Srila Prabhupada and he said, Prabhupada said, now he's attacking. You can kill him. So it's not just one size fits all. But in one sense, if we are willing to do what Krishna wants, then there's no reaction. It's not karma, it's devotional service. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Wow, that is so profound. If you do what Krishna wants you to do, there's no karma. Cool. Cool. Nice. Bhima Prabhu, we see your hand has been up. Please.
Yeah, the conch is going to blow soon, so I'll if there's afterglow, I'll say something, but otherwise,
Okay. Okay.
yep.
It looks like the altar is going to be opening soon, so can give that our full attention.
All right, Krishna.
Bhagavatam samasitam Purasundarangam Kandarkotikamaniya Vishesha Shobha Govinda Hari Purisham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Anjali Yasya Sakalen Diyavet Imanti Saranti Imanti Sayanti Naya Sadhu Kala Divasya Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Govindam Hari Purusham Bhajami Hari Purusham Bhajami Jai Shri Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gautama Bhagavan Ki Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Hare Krishna, Anuj Prabhu.
Haribo.
Haribo. I guess Ananda Bihari is not available to talk, but if you can stay and take a little more questions, if there's any.
Sure.
Bhima Prabhu, did you want?
Haribo, can I be heard okay?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. As a person who has many animals and have seen a lot of animals come and go, also dealing with wild animals from bobcats to coyotes to coy wolves to my horses and my dogs, etc., etc. So one understands that nature is a violent thing, even the weather. Adi Atmik, Adi Bodhik, Adi Daivik. You know, violence is a constituent. It's an energy of this world. It's Shiva dancing. And we do have to understand that violence is justified mostly in one circumstance only, and that is in protection of the innocent. In protection of the innocent or in protection of the many, one must stop the one. I'll give a little example. A neighbor farmer of mine raises chickens for eggs, which I don't view with any judgment at all, because he takes very good care of the chickens. There are dozens of them, and he gets eggs, which is practically speaking a non-violent food. And the chickens have free reign on the fields. They run around. They have a wonderful life, and they're protected by the roosters. It's a wonderful thing to see the animals, how they have a hierarchy of their own protection. I've seen a rooster attack a hawk who was attacking a chicken in my own yard, and the rooster won, and the hawk had to go, and the chicken was beat up, but okay. But anyways, one time in the middle of the night, I heard my horses, they were out at night, and they were going wild in their paddocks, and I came out to see what was going on. And my neighbor met me. He's across the way through some woods, and he said that a bobcat just broke into his pen somehow, and killed a dozen, had dragged out a dozen chickens and laid them in a pile. And he goes, he asked me, if the bobcat comes back, I'm going to have to shoot him. And I said, you do what's necessary. And he goes, well, I'm telling you, because when that gun goes off, your horses are going to have quite the party. So I said, don't worry about it. We don't need any bobcats in the area. That's for sure. So anyways, that came back and called me. He says, look out your side window there. I could see into his backyard. And the bobcat was simply sitting in his backyard looking at the last of the chickens in the pen, even though he had already taken a dozen. And I said to him, I go, maybe he needs to borrow your grill. But anyways, he ended up positioning his gun outside his back window and taking the bobcat. And it was sad, because the bobcat was a beautiful animal. I went over after I calmed the horses down. It was a beautiful animal. So we see that sometimes there's necessary violence. And we see in this world now, we see in a great way amongst humans, amongst civilizations, amongst philosophies, amongst so-called religions, that people get it into their craw to interpret scripture, whether it be our scripture, the Vedas, or the Kabbalah or the Bible, in order to commit violence. And we often see that the violence is committed simply for the sake of gaining land or gaining resources, which is not much different than what the animals do when they fight for land. So we should just always understand that violence is necessary to protect the innocent only. And that if violence should be coming towards us specifically, then perhaps Krishna is trying to tell us something. Also, just on another note, very quickly, as far as rodents go and pests, I have found that there are many, and if anybody wants to contact me, there are many methods to use. We have mice, we have groundhogs, we have insects galore on a farm. There's lots of food here. There's lots of ways to Ahimsa, non-violently trap and release. I've spent years studying this, the best ways to do this. And of course, the best way to keep insects out of your house is to make sure that you don't have a food supply. That's a big thing. If you keep the place clean, then you won't be, then insects and mice will not, especially mice, will not come. I've recently released a bucket of about 13 mice 4 miles from my house. They climb up a ladder, and the bucket is full of half full of grain, and they fall into this cornucopia of food. They can't get out because the bucket is smooth, and then I simply take them in the half bucket of grain in my van about 4 miles, because they can find their way back if it's under a mile. And I take them down the way, and I release them into the field and start them off with a pound of grain. And so there's always a way to keep varmints at bay without having to commit violence. Anyways, that's just what I wanted to say from personal experience. And I also wanted to make sure that everybody understands that when somebody says, oh, what does Krishna want me to do? And I'll do that in regards to violence. The question is what are you interpreting how are you interpreting what Krishna wants you to do? If you're reading scripture, I've seen scripture being read, I've seen the Vedas being read, saying that if somebody is under attack, then you must get them before they get you. But and using scripture as a justification, and I think some of us here know what we're talking about. I've heard justifications for violence that were unnecessary and criminal in nature, and using scripture in justification for it. So we have to be very careful, and that's where sadhu comes in. That's where consulting others who are outside the fray, who don't have a dog in the fight, they can come in and give an observation to you. Never be afraid to approach another Vaishnav, because when violence is concerned or aggression is concerned, you have to have many minds at work, and it should only be used, as in Arjun's position and Yudhishthir's position, as a last resort. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, great points, Prabhu. I love that. Thank you for sharing everything you shared. You've got a tremendous experience out there dealing with it, with that, being on the farm. So thank you for sharing all of that, and totally agree with all your points. So that's the point of last resort. You can even see in the Mahabharata where the Pandavas consult so many different people, whether it's Krishna, Vidura, Bhishma, they're consulting their mother Kunti. Like, it's not just, oh, we're gonna resort to this. Like, we see Duryodhan, who doesn't hesitate, to really not consult anyone other than his brothers and Karna and Shakuni, who all are gonna support him. And this is actually a really nice point, that when we're considering taking action, we should also consult people who might also disagree with us, who we know in our heart might disagree with us. So, for example, often when we're taking action, we end up consulting those who we know are going to agree with us. We see that Duryodhan does that. When he's taking action, he doesn't tell people, he doesn't tell Vidura when he's going to try to put the house of lack, the place the Pandavas are staying. He tries to burn that house, actually, when they're young children. But he doesn't really share his plans with people who he thinks will disagree with him. So being able to get an outside perspective, to your point, Bhima Prabhu, is so important.
That's why I got married. That's why I got married, to have someone always by my side who disagrees with me. And I've never been led wrong.
Balances the perspective. So that's critical. That is really critical. You have Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, and then you also have Paramatma within. But then also making sure that, like, to your point of interpretation, that's a very nuanced point, and that's where I mentioned it's an art. It's not necessarily a science. And part of that is making sure we're healthy in mind, we're healthy in body, particularly mind, and we're also making sure that we're consulting others. We're making sure that we're also in touch with at least Sattva Guna, because we're coming from a place of clarity and introspection, versus, tamas and rajas, which can be quite dangerous when we try to use those to justify violent means. So anyway, I hope that helps. But thank you for your thoughts. That was really wonderful.
Rima Prabhu, while the mice were in your care, did you give them prasadam? Did you preach to them? Did you play kirtan in the car when you were driving them? Didn't hear
Every
that.
time I meet a new animal, every time I meet a new animal, I chant Hare Krishna. I've had several times where even in the house, I always wondered, he wouldn't hurt a fly. He's so gentle, he wouldn't hurt a fly. And I've smashed a window before trying to catch a fly gently with a glass bowl, while chanting Hare Krishna. And I put the bowl against the window and put it too hard, and the window smashed. And then I had hell to pay with the wife. And then all the flies came in. So yeah, when you get to know animals, when you spend a long time with an animal, whether it be a dog or a horse or even the mice and you get to know them, you're spending hours. You understand that there's, as Prabhupada said, they're people. These are people. And they don't necessarily right away, you see dog, I see a horse. They're going to be a horse. They're going to act like a horse. And even new horses that come into my care, because we rescue horses and rehabilitate them and find them new homes. when you get to, at first when they come in, they're strangers, but then slowly but surely the horse actually opens up, and you can see in the eyes that the horse begins to trust you, and then the horse begins to show you its deep, beautiful personality, and then you try to mesh with that personality and gain more trust, and you try to help them out in some way, and so we have to understand that even the fly, he's just doing his business. That's what he's meant to do, and if you can go, I don't know what I'm going to take birth in my next life, so I want to make sure I'm well covered. That if I end up being a fly or a dog or a horse in my next life, because Lord knows I got it coming to me. I hopefully I'll have a devotee to take care of me, because I know that my dogs at least are living in dog heaven here. So thanks for asking. Yes, every time I open the gates in the morning, I'm much to the chagrin of the horses. I sing Hare Krishna. Their ears go back. They're like, "You're out of tune." So, but I get the words there. Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Where did I go wrong in life? I'm here in the shoebox of my New York City apartment, and there he is in the farm chanting Hare Krishna to the horses. That's the life. I'm just a rat in this life. Anyways, Anuj, wonderful class. Thank you so much. Thanks for letting everyone speak. Thanks for referring to Shastra. Thank you for being so therapeutical, as always. Thank you.
You. Yeah, for having me.
Okay. It was
Any
nice.
last thoughts as we wrap
Yeah,
up?
but
Yes.
yeah, say it, Anuj.
Noticing any last thoughts as we wrap up?
Last thought. Now, what's the last thought? That's yeah. No? All right, we'll try again later. We'll get Neha to speak in line with Guru Sadhu and Shastra. It's coming, Neha. It's coming. Okay, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. Happy Sunday, everybody. Chant, dance for Krishna, and be very gentle with those little souls. They're not coming to bother you. They're coming to hear about Krishna. That's their business. Krishna Gauda, we see you're very strongly situated in Srila Prabhupada's writings. That's very nice. That's very nice, Krishna Gauda. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare